The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to this TestStudio webinar. As usual, please allow us 1 minute or so that we have all the registered attendees joining this session. We'll be starting shortly. Thank you. All right, thank you very much for your time. I see that we have most of the people here already, so let's get started as soon as possible. As usual, good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all of our attendees, depending on what part of the globe you join today's TestStudio webinar, where we're going to talk about how to data drive your tests with TestStudio, showing you some tips and tricks as usual. Before we start, as some of you may already know, in order to make sure that you can hear me well and see my screen, you have the little hand icon on your GoToWebinar panel. I would kindly ask you to press it so I can make sure that you can hear and see. All right, hands up. Thank you very much. Cool, let's get going. The usual presentations. Today's webinar will be led by me. My name is Peter. I'm a sales engineer for Telerik, specializing in TestStudio product. I'm a certified Scrum Master, professional Scrum Master, and Prince2 practitioner. Today, my colleague Andy Wilwant will help me during the demo with some complex scenarios that you will be happy to see. Andy is the manager of sales engineering team in Telerik and also a certified Scrum Master. The webinar infrastructure first and some housekeeping rules. The session is going to be recorded for sure today, so whoever is interested into getting it after the session, do let me know so we can forward it to you guys. All of you are muted. We can communicate via the questions panel in on your GoToWebinar software. During the presentation or towards the end, we'll do our best to answer all of the questions. Or if we don't have enough time, we're going to follow up with you guys offline after the demo is over. And of course, what's the agenda for today? First and foremost, for the guys who have been with us into this webinar series in April, you know that we did have a new release of TestStudio R1 for 2020. So I'm going to brief you what's new from the kitchen for the ones of you who missed that. Then we're going straight forward to the topic today, which is data-driven testing, a quick overview. Why should we go with data-driven tests? How TestStudio can help you do your data-driven tests, of course, and having a beautiful demo with a lot of examples, of course. In the meantime, as I mentioned, you can ask questions into the questions panel. We'll do our best to address it. The promise slide for TestStudio latest April release called R1 2020. Last week, actually exactly 7 days ago, was the Wednesday. We did have the release webinar for the ones of you who missed it and are still interested in to see in live the new features. Please ask us and we can send you the recording. Of course, I'm not sure if it's still on our website. We'll double check this, of course. What we have now in TestStudio is a whole new set of features which enhance the so-called executive dashboard reportings, meaning that you can now create, review, and share within your organization custom reports of your test lists, execution results, and logs for each particular test in question. The other big chunk that we introduced with our latest release was the support of the so-called web components. For the ones who are not familiar with the notion of web components, think of those three major sections as part of your application, which are the HTML templates, the creation of custom elements, and the shadow DOM, which allows you to create web applications directly using the browser's framework, for example. All of these three main sections are now supported by TestStudio, and this brings an advantage. For example, if you are developing applications like the ones using Salesforce platform, if you're familiar with the Aura and the widening frameworks, those guys are now supported out of the box with TestStudio. Last but not least, we have the regular bug fixes, which are accompanied by the ongoing UX changes, which you can see in your TestStudio interface, like small changes on the welcome screen, the ribbon, and the project explorer, of course. And we also update our browser extensions as usual, including the now second most popular browser in the world, the latest release from Microsoft called Chromium Edge. Right. Going back to our main topic today, data-driven testing. I'm pretty sure that most of you guys are already familiar with what that would be, but still allow me to share a few comments, a few words about data-driven testing as a whole. First, that kind of approach for data-driven testing allows you to, first you have some stored test data, whether it's going to be in a table or spreadsheet, let's say, which allows you to automate and have a single test or test script that can execute tests for all of the test data in that table. Right. What happens when you have this data-driven approach is that input values are read from the data files and then are stored into a variable, right, in your test scripts. Like this, you have the ability to combine and build both positive and negative test cases into just one single test. As far as details are concerned, this input data, of course, can be stored in a single or multiple data sources like CSV or XML, XLS, or you can reference your databases if you'd like. Oops. Apologies for that. Let's go to the next slide quickly. Why should we use actually data-driven testing approach? First and foremost, it's optimization. The whole idea of automation testing is to optimize and save time, right? I'll show you multiple examples how you can literally cut your test creation and test execution time, even with a simple data-driven test, not to mention a complex scenario, which you're also going to see later on this presentation. Also, by adding such data-driven approach, you can extend your functional tests by keeping the data external and only add it to your functional tests when it is necessary. Why am I mentioning here the login test, and why do you need to remember it? For the ones of you who were on our first webinar in April with TestStudio tips and tricks, remember we were talking about how you can save time with the notion of test step. Let's say that you have a simple login test where you need to input your user and password every time you want to execute a test in your application, because you need to make sure that you're logged in, right? This is something simple that you can automate, save time. But let's say that you're using this login into 100 tests, and then your username and password change, and you need to go over those 100 tests and change the username and password, right? That's where the test step notion comes, in order to spare you such time. You can even data drive this by inputting different usernames and passwords into a simple file, whether it's going to be, as I mentioned, CSV, XML, or some spreadsheets, right? And want to test the login only this time. But you have multiple data sets that you make sure that they should be executed correctly and that you need to be logged in at the end of the day. So what can you do? You can create multiple scripts for each data set and run each of those tests separately one by one, which means that you will definitely spend a lot of time. You can, on the other hand, manually change the value of the test script and run it several times, which will even take even more time in order to do that. Or you can simply use data-driven approach, import the data from the spreadsheet or whatever data source you're using, fetch the test data from the table rows one by one, and execute only one test. Simple as is, right? However, this scenario can become even more complicated if you need to test another basic functionality like registration. I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with this screenshot here that you see on the top right part of your screens. For the ones of you who registered with GoToWebinar software. So let's imagine that those guys had to test initially the registration page, right? You see how many combo boxes, input fields, and text boxes there are here, like first name, last name, email address, city, whatever. Some of them, as I mentioned, are drop downs. Some of them are autocomplete text boxes, etc. And with the case of the EU or America, you have different countries and the different states, and you need to make sure that no matter what you select here, which province and which country, or even which industry, you need to be correctly registered for the corresponding webinar or demo or whatever. So first, if you have to do this manually, it will take you more than one day, believe me. in order to do that. Even if you do automation to some extent, to some level, this will also take you such amount of time. Remember, when we were talking about the login test, you can either create 100 scripts for each of the data sets here, for each of the state, for each of the country, for each of the industry that's chosen, or manually change them, right? This will also take you time. However, you can just simply create one table, whether it's going to be a spreadsheet or CSV, let's say, input those values there as columns and rows, data bind to your test case, to your test script, execute it once with all the different scenarios within the same test. Right? You will definitely save time like that. During the demo, I'm going to show you in a simplified way, of course, how you can achieve this with a Google search. Right. I hope this makes sense. So let's quickly go forward within our presentation and concentrate now on TestStudio. TestStudio supports data-driven testing, of course, out of the box. And as far as data sources are concerned, we do have 5 major different data sources that we support. Right. This is the local data source, something that I'm going to be using for the demo today, right? But you can also reference an Excel spreadsheet, an XML file, a CSV file, and SQL database. The details for each of those and how you can reference them in TestStudio are available in our documentations. Actually, the ones here are hyperlinks with more information on the topic. Remember this slide? I'm pretty sure some of you guys remember this from our previous sessions. Before you actually code in TestStudio, it's recommended to use the point-and-click recorder, the more advanced step builder, even some position-based automation combined with image verification in order to build your bulletproof tests in TestStudio. And if nothing of that does the job, of course, you can use C# or your VB.NET coding skills. I have taken this slide and modified it a little bit in order to tell you what you need to do before you data drive your test, if you need to data drive your test, of course. This is the general workflow and the rule of thumb. First, you need to add the data source to your project, right? You have some scrambled screenshots, of course, but we're going to go over them during the demo, so no worries about that. After you add the data source to your project on a project general level, you need to bind the data source of a particular test in order to let TestStudio know that this test is going to be data-driven, right? Here you can see an example of attaching an Excel spreadsheet to a test, right? While we drill down further into the test and into the particular test step, which is part of this test, we can attach columns to different values in TestStudio, right? And what you can see here in the corresponding test step properties. And last but not least, remember, again, one of the first tips and tricks for TestStudio automation in general was that on every few action steps, like click steps, you have at least one verification step. The same is valid for data-driven tests as well. You can attach some columns of your data source file in order to verify that your tests execute correctly. Right, this is exactly what I'm going to show you during during the demonstration. Excuse me. Since we were talking about test a step and how you can spare you time, I want to let you guys know that with regards to test modularization, you can have more than one level for data driving. What do I mean for that? Imagine those three general scenarios. You have two tests, test A and test B, created in TestStudio. And how you can create multi-level tests and what are the three available scenarios here are as follows, and as you can see on your screen. First, there is the test A, which is data bound. And this test A calls the other test, test B. Right. There can be some different scenarios, like test B is a test step within this test A. In such case, there could be a scenario in which data is attached to test A. And you can also even have an example where test B is bound to some different columns of the test A data. Right. This scenario is supported out of the box for TestStudio. The other big scenario is the opposite. You have test A that calls test B, which is data bound. Let's say you have test A with some simple steps. So login, perform some test step for the login, which is your test B, and log out. Right, and this test B can perform data-driven text input, for example, or data-driven verification. Right. And last but not least, you have a data-bound test A, which calls a data-bound test B, right? Which is also supported out of the box. I know that now it seems a little bit maybe too much and overwhelming. As soon as you start playing with the different scenarios with TestStudio data-driven options, you see how it goes. I also have the demo now will help you speed up with this as well. As I mentioned, as soon as you have some questions for us guys, do not hesitate to ask. Now it's demo time. Allow me to pause my screen, bring up TestStudio, and we can get going. All right. Okay, cool. You should be able to see my screen right now and see TestStudio. Right. First, I have already created a test that I want to show you guys, and then I'll try to replicate this test for you to see how I cut creation, verification, and execution time. And then I will switch back to my colleague Andy, who can show you another scenario and example of data driving your tests with TestStudio. Okay, so let me execute this, see what happened. I'm going to execute this with annotations. It means that the execution speed will be lower, and you can see the actual clicks on the screen with those annotations. And here we go. I'm performing a simple search in Google for Telerik TestStudio product, getting the results, clicking on the first result, in Google and then check what's appearing on the page. And then I'm doing that for another product of Telerik called Can-Do UI, clicking on the first result on the page that appears and make sure that I'm on the correct page. Right. I really wanted to make this a little bit simplified, but you see actually how powerful this could be with data driving. So what happened now? We have a success, yay. I had 2 iterations of this, right? Iteration 1 and iteration 2. I was first searching for TestStudio, and I was then searching for Can-Do UI. Right. I have data-driven this test with the help of a local data table that I created beforehand. As you can see, it has 2 rows for the 2 iterations, for the 2 executions of my test, with 3 columns. The first column is the name of the product. The second column is the result that I'm clicking on the Google results page. And then it's the verification text. This is copy-paste of the header of the corresponding page, that description of the corresponding page that appears on screen when I click on the first result. Okay, if I were to do this manually, or having an each test for each of the product, it would have taken me a lot of time. Let me show you what I mean by that. First, I need to fire up my browser. First, I need to create a test when I go to Google, right? Then I'm searching for Telerik TestStudio. I search for it. I click on the first result. I verify that on the screen is shown the functional test automation for modern web applications, right? Then I need again to go to Google, right? Oops, sorry. I need to search for Can-Do UI. I need to click on the first result, and I need to make sure that on the page appears that you can build better JavaScript applications faster. And then imagine that I'm the marketing manager of Telerik, and I need to do this basic test for the entire company portfolio, right? And the products that you see here, whether it's going to be Telerik reporting or Telerik UI for Blazor, Xamarin, Ajax, or Unite UX product, right? It will take me definitely a lot of time in order to verify that all of this works. And again, this is just a simple test. How data-driven tests can help you, having only one such example and having only one test. Let's start from scratch and see how it goes. I'm going to create a new project. Okay, I'm going to create a new test. Okay, remember, first and foremost, you need to manage data, right? You can add different data sources, whether it's going to be an Excel file, CSV, XML, or database. You can do that from here, from the ribbon. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to use the local data feature of TestStudio, creating the table on the fly. Here, I'm going to have 3 columns, and let's do it with 2 rows. let's say. This button here allows you to create the table on the go. Of course, at any point of time, you can add a new row and a new column here, or delete them with the help of those green and red buttons here. Right. You can give them friendly names of those columns, like product. Actually, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to do this for the sake of the presentation. Result. And my third column is going to be named verification. Right. I'm saving this with Control and S, and then I'm going to add as the name of the product TestStudio, or Telerik TestStudio actually. Let's do it like this. Okay, for the result, for the first result, there should be something called TestStudio, of course, and for the verification, we'll add later. Second would be Telerik Kendo UI. I'm pretty sure that Kendo UI should appear in Google as a first result. And as I don't remember the name of the descriptions by heart, I'm going to take them from Google. Now, let's see. Functional test automation for modern web applications. This is going to be my first verification. I'm doing the same for Kendo UI. Build better JavaScript apps faster. Good. Okay. This is the thing that we're going to verify. Okay. I'm saving this into local data. It's still not bound to my tests. I've just added it on project level. This was the first step. Now I'm going to simply record the test only once. Doing it like this. Starting the recorder. I'm just making sure that everything is fine here. Yep. Okay. Let's do it. Going to bring Google in English language this time. Apologies for that. Okay. Here is my Google. I'm going to search. I'm waiting for the recorder to fire up. And I'm going to search for Telerik TestStudio. Right? Clicking Google search. Click on the first result. And we have the page here with the text. I can highlight it, as you can see, and build a verification step with our step builder like this text contains. Right. There we go. I'm switching off the recorder. And what we have here is our first very basic test. I need to clean it a little bit. Navigate to Google, enter text. This I don't need. Click submit button. As you can see here, each of the images are captured for each of the corresponding elements. Then I have the click TestStudio H3 tag. And I need to verify that this text appears. Now that I have the test, As I mentioned, I need to do it the same for Kendo UI or Blazor or Telerik reporting and lose the entire time and lose your time during this webinar. That's why I'm going to simply data bind some of those steps. The first and foremost is to go to the enter text step, right? Here you can see the properties of this particular step, right? Let me just bring up some real estate like this. You can go to bindings. Now the table, the local table, the local data that I created appears in this drop-down list, and I can select the first column, which was called product. Click Set, Save. With Control and S, and now my step is data-driven. Right. This means that this step will be executed first, searching for Telerik TestStudio, and then it will be searching for Telerik Kendo UI. Right. Then I need to go to my search result in Google, and here you need to be able to tell TestStudio that it needs to click on the first result, whether it's going to be TestStudio or Kendo UI or Telerik UI for Blazor. It means that here you need to data drive the element itself, right? How you can do that? You know that from the Elements Explorer, no matter where you click on the test steps, you have the elements tree here with the highlighted corresponding element. Here it is. I can double click on the element, or I can edit it with the right button of the mouse. And again, I need to clear some real estate here with TestStudio. So it is a tag name, right, which is called H3, and in our case, the text content starts with Telerik TestStudio. I'm going to data drive these properties, however, choosing the result column from my data set, right? And I'm going to change the logic from starts with to, let's say, contains. Okay. Saving this, right? I'm going back to my web test, and now I have the verification step. We need to verify that the corresponding text that I pasted exists somewhere on this page. How we can do that, you already know. We click on the step, we go to bindings, we're looking for the expected string, and I'm clicking the verification column, clicking this on set, and saving. And I think that we're pretty much set to execute the test. Right. Don't worry that the description of the steps themselves didn't change here. This is just the friendly name of the test. Of course, you know that from the properties you can rename it with the names of the variables that are created themselves. But now, for the sake of the presentation, I'm going to leave it like this and execute my test to see actually what we did. We're waiting for the test to finish. And see where we have a problem, if we have a problem, of course. All right, perfect. So if you know, some of you may already know, of course, but when you have data-driven tests, depending on the number of rows that you have in your data source file, you have this given number of iterations, right? And the results are seen per row, per iteration here. As you can see here, our first iteration passed with Telerik TestStudio, and our second iteration failed with the search of Kendo UI. For each of these, right, you can view the log and see what happened per test, per iteration, right? Let's see what happened now with Kendo UI and why it failed. Just before going to straight troubleshooting, this was an example how you can create the functional test once and then extend it, like we were talking during the presentation, by adding a data source so that you don't need to do the same functional test again and again. Right. Let's go now to the log and see what the error is. So this is my first iteration here. What actually happened? It was a success. In my second iteration, we couldn't find the element H1 with text that starts with functional testing, blah, 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 blah. Let's see the test steps, the test failure details, like this. So here, as you can see, TestStudio was still looking for a description of the first product, functional testing, made easy, rather than with the description of the second product, which was called Kendo UI. In order to do that, you need to go back and data drive the element, as I mentioned and as I showed you for the previous one where we did the Google search results, right? However, as I mentioned, we're a little bit ahead of time. We just have 15 minutes more to do that, and I really want to concentrate on answering some of your questions, which I see that are here. I would suggest that we quickly cover another data-driven scenario with my colleague Andy, if you're okay, and in the meantime, I will be able to answer your questions. Andy?
All right, thank you, Peter. I'll get my screen shared out and show a couple on my side. Thanks for the questions. Lots of good questions coming in. Hopefully we can get those answered for you momentarily. Okay. So everybody should be able to see my screen at this point. I'm jumping into a couple tests that have already been created to show you where data-driven testing can take you based off of kind of what Peter's described here to begin with and sort of where it can go from here. And forgive me, I just have one test to quickly repair. I was just re-recording a few steps in here where I had some code that I no longer need, so some duplicate steps there, and we'll go ahead and save that one. And actually at this point I'll go ahead and delete the code behind since it's not necessary. Okay, as you can see in the project level itself, when data is on the test, you do have an icon that shows up next to that test. So there's actually in this folder here 3 different tests that indicate there's data associated to that test or bound to that test. That's the icon that indicates that. from the project level. Now, what this particular example shows, if we start from this sort of master test, is first of all using what Peter mentioned too with test to step. Now, test to step allows me to call different subtests together and build out scenarios, for example. And you'll see that I'll bring up another example here where I use a master test, and you'll see there's actually a lot of these master tests in my project. They are quite useful. And we'll bring this one up as well. So again, this one is a CRUD operation. There's a create, there's an update, there's a delete, there's 3 different subtests here. Now, first of all, when you're using data-driven testing and test to step, one thing I like to make people aware of is that if you have a data-bound test as step, it will act like a loop. And this goes back to what Peter was talking about with the multi-level tests, test A versus B, which one has the data, which one's passing data. We try to make it very easy for you to share data between tests, and that's really what this one indicates too and shows off, is the ability to share data between tests as well. So again, if we have, let's say, for example, step 2 here, data-driven, and it's the only one that's data-driven, then the way this test will execute is it will execute the first test. It will then loop through the second test multiple iterations, 1 iteration for each row of data that's supplied there before it comes out of that and then goes into the create new contact. So based on that kind of behavior, you may want to format and formulate your different levels of your test accordingly. Sometimes we may want to log in once and perform a lot of other duties. We may have a parent test that contains the login, and then we may use test to step to call different actions into the test that login will perform. And you may want to loop that at the login level where each user logs in, performs the same duties, and then the next user logs in and performs those same duties. And so you do want to make sure that you have your test to step kind of formulated in a way that that makes that looping work correctly. So just be aware of that data binding a test to step will create a loop, and that in the way you organize your test will determine kind of how that comes about. So first of all, in this random word account creation, I wanted to show you another place to get your data. So you can bring data from, as Peter mentioned, database, XML, CSV, Excel, or even local data that's built into the test itself. However, one other option is to extract data and create variables from the UI. So this particular example goes to a random word generator. It uses extract, which by the way allows you to name the variable whatever you'd like, and that then makes this variable available to this test. For example, if I was to, let's say we have a verification, we'll just add a quick verification of making sure that this button is visible to the bottom of this test. If I wanted to data drive this test step here, I can access the bindings property, drop the drop down, and see that those random word variables that are created within this test are available to use in this same test. Okay, so if I wanted to data drive this verification later on in the test, I can simply grab that variable, and just like we did with the external data sources, bind that. Now this will not, the difference here is when we're using extracted data, since it's runtime data, you're not going to get multiple iterations, right? It's going to grab the value at runtime and it's going to feed that back in. So it's a single value when it's using this kind of format of extraction. But what I want to show you here is not the availability of the data in the same test, but by the way of creating a master test, I can share data between this first test and this third test. Because actually where I'm using the random words here is in the third test to create a contact essentially. Actually all 3 of these randoms here for the first name, the last name, and the email address. Now the way this happens, you'll notice that if we were to go into the data binding properties, let me just create another new test step here, something just like a visible verification. So if I wanted to data drive something like this and I go in to the bindings and the drop downs, you'll see I have columns 1 through 5, right? Well, that's because I have a local data source enabled on this test. It's empty, but it's been enabled. That's why that's here. Now, I didn't use it, I didn't need it, I can certainly delete it, but that's why when you see the drop down, you see those columns listed there. The only reason they're listed there is because at some point I went over and I turned on that data table even though I didn't use it. So there's nothing there for me. And we don't see random word 1, random word 2, or random word 3 in this data table. So, and that's because those values don't live in this particular test. They live in the other test. So we saw them in the test that they came from. You can easily reuse an extracted variable in the same test later on, right? Obviously, you can't use random word to data drive something above that, but later on you can reuse that variable in that same test. Or if they are, sisters to each other under the same parent test or master test, as I call it, you can pass the variables. And the way that this is done is it's not something that's you see the column name for. You actually type it in, or what I like to do is even copy paste it so I don't mess up anything. But this time we'll just type it in. And we can type in a variable reference name. Now, if I type this in and I hit set, basically I now have the ability to pull the variable from test step 1, which is the extract subtest, and use it in step 3, which is the create new contact. So that is how you would reference a variable, an extracted variable. And I'm just going to clear this up. We'll save things. And I haven't run this test in a while. We'll just see real quick if this runs. And I'm going to jump into one more quick example. Meanwhile, while this test is running, Peter, if you had any questions you wanted to jump in and answer while we watch this one, feel free to.
Yep, I'm chatting with the guys in the moment. We had questions as, for example, if overriding between the local data source and some external data sources can happen depending on what you reference. It's really up to how you configure your separate tests, so there shouldn't be any issues or conflicts between local data and, let's say, external spreadsheet that you reference in your tests, right?
Perfect. Cool. And meanwhile, we got to pass out of that. One other test I want to show real briefly is another master test. This one, the reason I like to show this one is actually within my update subtest, I have another subtest. And I've specifically carved this in its own subtest because I do want to treat it as a loop. Effectively, with my master test here, I have create, update, delete. We have a create process that creates a record, right? And I'm double clicking in to open up these individual tests. There's 14 steps in here for this one. The second subtest is that update, which just has a basic verification and goes into another subtest, which we're going to explore here in a moment. And then I have a delete subtest as well. Now in my update, let's see if I can get back to that, this one here. In my update subtest here, again, because I have that data driven, it treats it like a loop. And this is where I'm actually data driving something. Now, Peter had showed you different options to data drive a surface level verification, right? We can go to bindings. There's data on this test already. So I could use this to create the data driven verification. I can data drive the input, right? You can also see, by the way, if we jump back to this first test here with a navigate, you can data drive URLs. You can even data drive dialog handlers, upload, download. I have some tests that loop through downloading multiple files, and I data drive those download dialogues. So there's a lot you can data drive kind of at that surface level. And then Peter also talked about data driving elements at the element level. And that's where this one's coming from. I'm actually using local data Datadriven item name, and that item name is involved in this click edit link. You know, here at the surface level within the test step descriptions, you don't see any data-driven components, because here in this particular test, it's in the element itself. If we go in and edit the element for click edit link, you can see that I've created a chained find expression, and these are great ways to work with dynamic environments like a very powerful Kendo grid, which is what we're working with in this example. So in this, we have a find logic that looks to locate the grid. In the grid, it finds a row, and then in the row, it finds the edit button, and ultimately at the end of the day, it clicks the edit button. So what's being data-driven here is how we're locating the row. This makes a very, very powerful use case. It looks like a complex function to create this find logic. It's not. It's very easy with our find logic editor and element editing. If there is data on the test, if it's bound to the test, that data will be accessible to the element level for the elements on that test. So what I've done is I've associated the item name column to the inner text contains statement here that's combined with the row. So effectively what this does is in the grid, find the row that contains the word cranberry or aniseed or chowder or whatever it might be, and then click the corresponding edit button. So this solves an age-old problem of how do we work with inline editing grids in a meaningful way when they're a dynamic situation. We'll go back, we'll run this test so you can see how it runs and how it performs that data-driven component. So even though you can't see the data-driven component here, it's there, and it's basically being used to locate the element, the target element for this. So we'll go ahead and run this. I know we're almost out of time, so we'll open it back up for any more questions, Peter, that you may have that you wanted to address.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andy. We have a few guys who requested a recording of this this webinar, so we'll make sure to follow up with you after the test.
Yes, and I'll also throw a link in the chat of the GoToWebinar. We do have a GoToWebinar channel. Currently, these videos are not on our current website's being rebuilt, so we've got a couple more weeks till the new one comes out, and then things will be in new good places. But for the time being, we do have the GoToWebinar channel page that I'll throw a link in the chat for, and that's where you can find the recordings of these and then others as well that we may have.
All right, thank you very much. I see that we finished on time. From what I see, all of the questions are now addressed and it answered. Of course, we can continue the communication offline with you guys. With whoever is interested, stay tuned with us for next week when we're going to cover test lists scheduling, execution, and the features of our executive dashboard and how it can help with your reporting. One more time, thank you very much for your time and attention, and we'll be in touch. Have a nice remaining of your day or evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.